Hello and welcome once again.
Happy birthday to me. Yes, it's the birthday show. And I'm joined here with the crazy and hopefully well-rested from vacation, Cory Strode, the ever arguable Adam Vermillion of Pizzas and Panels, and Dangerous Dan Mohr with hopefully Wolfie, because we all know we want to see Wolfie. We don't want to see anybody else. And we're here for my birthday show because it's all about me.
And I am in my birthday suit just for you.
Actually, the real birthday is up on my Facebook timeline. I got a missive that Cory mentions 8 years ago. Today was the first Crazy Comics podcast.
That's true.
And I figure that's probably a more interesting birthday to celebrate than the fact that I'm now 53 and getting old. Happy birthday to me.
You're 53?
Maybe I'll read some Disney.
Isn't 8 years 53 in podcast years?
Well, no, I feel better. See, that's why we have...
I don't. I now feel 50. I now feel much, much older.
Not so much for vacation time. But Cory, as always, has something special planned for this here podcast. Cory, tell them what we're going to give the folks here.
We're gonna give them something.
Chlamydia.
Chlamydia. Have you met chlamydia?
That's why I'm here, right?
Too late. What? Oh, yeah.
Yes, if you want a social disease, Wolfie is quite social.
I'm here. Did
you muzzle Dan? Because we have yet to hear from him.
That's kind of how it works.
Yeah, kind of.
Good man, that Dan.
Well, no, we're going to be talking. We've got a 2-part episode.
And which part is this?
This is part 1, where the original Murdoch comes back to attack MacGyver.
And if you can find them, you can call the A-Team.
No. We're going to talk about 80's stuff.
Oh, you mean special episode with Gordon Jump? This is a very special episode.
I thought it'd be a special episode with Nancy Reagan telling Dan not to do drugs.
Dan, no. Just say no.
Okay, Ricky and Alfonso deciding whether or not they're going to dine and dash.
Ooh.
Wasn't that at the end of all the video games we used to play? Just say no to drugs.
It was in, Narc. I remember that. Where basically you just shoot people, and then as you completed a screen, it would have the FBI logo and say, "Don't do drugs." Instead, just, you kill people.
Sure.
And it worked, too, because no one does drugs anymore.
It's much better to kill people when you're sober. You can enjoy it more.
Now, what's that goofy drug that's out there? You can just touch it and it kills you? You don't even have to swallow it.
That'd be you, Joe.
Yes. I am not swallowable.
Moving on!
It's pitiful, though.
For my wife to run in, but she apparently isn't here.
Don't worry, Joe. I'll try.
Well, let's have our special guests fill us in on what they've been doing since we last saw them. Adam, I hear you were in an auditorium.
I was. It was crazy.
Now that's our gig.
Yeah, don't be messing on us. Do we walk around and say, "Hey, we're pizzas"?
No.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was at Cedar Rapids Comic-Con over the weekend. Well, one day of the weekend, and was put in charge of a panel room, and it went really, really well. And
was it what color was the panel? I mean, was it really good?
What?
Some kind of paneling in the room. I thought, was it like wood or like mauve or, what kind of panel did you go for?
Linoleum.
Oh, hot deepy. Linoleum. Hot deepy.
Yeah, you don't get rug burns much that way.
No. Not much fun at all.
I've already lost control.
Did you fill it?
Yes. No.
Let's put it this way: did you have more than 6 people?
Yes, definitely.
Congratulations, you beat us.
Beat us.
At every single panel. So,
Awesome.
yeah, it was a good time. I don't know if this has been announced yet or not, but talking to the gentleman Preston Moore who runs Cedar Rapids Comic-Con, they drew in almost 14,000 people for their one-day show.
Sweet
Nice.
Christmas.
Yeah. And he puts on a hell of a con. And it was just a good day. I mean, I didn't see most of it because I was in like this room from 9 a.m. to about 4:30 with a 10-minute break between panels. So I didn't get to really partake.
You're too damn entertaining. If you weren't entertaining, if you sucked at what you were doing, you wouldn't have to sit in the room for 9 hours.
That's true. That's true. Maybe I should become really bad at it. But I got to interview Jason Aaron.
And did he spill any beans on things that are coming up? New series he might be doing. Who the new Thor's going to be?
The Powerball numbers.
How his beard is doing.
His beard was doing magnificently.
Oh my.
No, just there's some creator-owned stuff coming up that he didn't really get into. Something he called Secret Thing that is coming out from Marvel. That was just working title, I guess.
Secret Thing.
Secret Thing.
So it's just Secret Wars, but only the Thing is going.
Why
yes,
man thing?
Yes, according to Bleeding Cool. And what else did he bring up? He said that, of course, Cory, to answer your question from Facebook, he has let the people know who need to be let known that he's very much interested in doing Conan.
Good.
But that does not mean he is doing Conan.
I understand, but I can't think of anybody at Marvel who'd do better at it.
So, but it was a great weekend. I couldn't complain. I went in with a bout of food poisoning, so that might be my only complaint. But I made a seal with some bananas and yogurt and Pedialyte and just soldiered through and did what needed to be done.
Well, congratulations. And you're still having episodes come out.
Yeah.
So obviously there's more than 2 comic creators in Iowa.
Yeah, there might be 3. Maybe if I can get 4, I can just do like a monthly series with each one.
You know what you should do is just pass out crayons to a kid, and once he's done drawing, interview him.
That would work too.
There you go.
Look, we're full of $1 million ideas.
Have you interviewed your daughter yet? I don't think so.
Not yet. I'm waiting for her to get a little bit older.
Well, if you wait too long, she's going to move on to coloring books, and
I don't know. I think
it won't fit the format.
I think interviewing like a toddler would be kind of cool.
I think Adam, I'm waiting for her to get older too.
Oh no!
Good thing you're in Iowa. Oof.
That was off.
You might have to move. You might have to move one state down. What's below Iowa?
Missouri, where then that is legal.
That is bad.
God, doing a podcast with a toddler, I've only been doing that for 8 years. I don't know what it's like. Dan, what have you been up to since you were last on the show for Festivus?
Bum.
Oh, God, for the last 2 months. Working holidays, mainly, unfortunately.
The station. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it just got bought out. Some
We
German
did?
conglomerate. Yeah, they're no longer Minnesota owned. Run by the Iowan cartel.
Yeah, there you go. Let's see, but I did. I don't know if this has been announced publicly yet, but I actually did interview and or audition and got the new Master of Ceremonies at the Anime Detour convention for their opening and closing ceremonies.
Oh,
So that'll be fun. Yeah. So Wolfie really, I think it was Wolfie more than I, but we'll, we will be some of the first and last things seen at the convention, which is actually kind of frightening now that I think of it. Those poor kids, they are going to be scarred for life.
Wolfie will have to be PG.
I was told PG-13.
Ah! And how is Wolfie reacting to that?
Well, he realizes that he's going to be wearing a muzzle half the time, so he's not sure if he's happy or not.
He's been humping fire hydrants all day.
Yeah.
And Joe, what have you been up to since last week? Nobody cares.
Getting older, apparently.
He spends a week up north, and he's just cockier than shit. All right. Nope, same old, same old. I spent the first half of the week sitting around waiting, and then we spent one day busting our ass when everybody who came to town for the Super Bowl left. So I got a lot of reading done. Actually, I spent a lot of time on Facebook.
So you were productive as usual.
Well, let's just say I am the master of the meme. There is not a out-of-context cartoon panel or comic book panel that I have in storage that I cannot fit to almost any Facebook post. Much too many people's annoyance.
Well, we wanted to talk.
The best one was on TSA Break Room, which is a closed group, where somebody anonymously was complaining that there are certain TSOs of the female persuasion that leave their third button on their uniform unbuttoned. And the hilarity ensued. You can let your mind go with that. Let's just say it was as bad as you'd imagined.
Well,
how about you, Mr. Strode? What did you do? Tell us about your time, your much vaunted time away.
I drove up to Two Harbors.
Okay, that's enough.
All right. We are talking about the 80s. And I brought Dan and Adam in because that's when they started reading comics.
No, I had to go back and read 80s comics. I didn't start until the 90s.
Oh, really?
Well, off the show. Okay,
yeah.
Next.
Well, Dan, you're off the show. Adam started reading comics in the 80s.
We can edit around it, can't we? There must be some Lady Dorito flying around.
1985.
It wasn't Secret Wars 2, was it?
No.
That's why you're still reading.
Transformers number 6.
Ooh. Come on, guys, sing it with me.
Transformers. More than meets the eye. Oh, Jesus.
You guys are terrible.
He was the ultimate Transformer, wasn't he?
Who was?
Jesus.
Jesus?
My gardener.
Oh, yeah. You ready to... Yeah.
So I thought what we do is we go through our favorite 80s comics. We'll do 5 each this week, and then 5 each next week. So we each get a top 10.
Ooh. I brought 12 because I think 2 of mine are going to be taken.
All right.
They probably will. Because, back then we were pretty much slaves to what was ever selling. And, going out of the way looking for weird esoteric stuff probably wasn't as easy as it is nowadays. Because you remember, no internet. I don't remember ever picking up. I think was Advance Comics in our area. I remember reading that.
Depends on the distributor that your shop was with. Because that was back during a time when there were lots of distributors.
Yeah.
And then about 87, there was the black and white. Well, in 85 and 86, there was a black and white boom. The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles came out. And the first issue was instantly worth $100 because they only printed 3,000 of them. Imagine that, Joe. A small press comic selling 3,000 copies and people wanting more.
Shh, not so loud. People at Marvel are going to be, really juicing at that. Oh, 300, 3,000.
Hey, remember, Marvel had their own Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles knockoff that only came out 5 years or 6 years after the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
Always one to jump on a trend.
Yep, the Power Pachyderms. Everybody had their Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles knockoffs back then. But by 86, everybody was using their lunch money to print black and white comics, and there'd be ads in Comics Buyers Guide. Oh, this comic's coming out in 2 months, and it's the next Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. And distributors got wrapped up in the hype, and they were, buying cases of this stuff to sell 2 months later to make money. Then the bottom fell out of that market, and distributors started dropping right and left.
And then, of course, actually, a quick sidebar. Did any of you guys buy any black and whites that you later went, what the hell was I thinking? For example, I spent $35 buying a Fish Police #1.
Yeah.
I bought it because, first of all, it was going for that. And second, the guy was like, well, Pat, my partner Pat, was looking to buy this too. Oh, really? Well, I'll buy it before him. Needless to say, Pat too bought a copy of Fish Police #1 for $35.
Being told that you were looking to buy it.
Probably. And actually, as a comic, it's pretty funny. I mean, I know they made a real dismal TV show on it, and it did eventually go on, I believe, published through Apple and then Kamiko. So it had some shelf life. The creator did actually get to finish his story. And of course, I'm scouring the eBays and internets trying to find those cheap copies so I can actually finish reading it. And to this day, I still have my $35 Fish Police #1 that I keep as I should just slab it. And just keep it as a lesson to be learned, especially nowadays with the hyper, oh my God, this variant's worth hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And how much is it worth now?
It was probably not worth the 20, 30 seconds I spent explaining it. Well, the question is were any of you guys, because you just started, or in your case, Dan, you went backwards, and Cory, you were in the thick of it. Were there any black and whites that you got, and then later on you were like, what the hell am I thinking?
Not that I remember, but they did spur me and a buddy in high school to try to make our own.
Ooh.
So we did the juvenile radioactive judo wombats. And so they were a mix of the turtles and the radioactive black belt hamsters, because there were 5. So we had the 4, and they were named after the Beatles. And then there was Ed, who had guns.
So you're way ahead of the 90s craze of big guns.
Yeah, this was like right at the beginning of the 90s. This was like freshman year of high school. And I thought I was very clever because they got their mutations from radioactive beer. So
that's actually good.
The second issue origin story was called The Secret of the Booze.
Oh.
It could work.
And I was 15 when I came up with that, so I thought that I was pretty awesome.
And now?
My level of humor hasn't matured beyond that. So.
I gotta be honest,
it's horrible.
It's still better than one of the books I bought. And I didn't buy it thinking it was going to be, worth money. I bought it as kind of, I have this deep love of things that are terrible. Ed Wood movies, Wolfie.
You do love me.
I do have a copy of Solson's Those Crazy Peckers, a black and white comic about 3 chickens. I also have Reagan's Raiders.
My God, it's in Atomic Avenue.
But I think I have the best black and white story. I was hired by Solson to write Iron Maidens, which was about a group of 4 female bodybuilders who were also private detectives. And they liked my script on it so much that I was supposed to take over Reagan's Raiders with issue, I think, 7 or 8. Sadly, the entire company collapsed before any of that saw print. Or
Those
maybe
Crazy
that's a good
Peckers.
thing.
It's written by James Hallett and drawn by Kevin Bliven, who is a co-creator of Black Book,
Bliven!
tells the exploits of a rock band composed entirely of chickens. The Peckers, Sensible Rick, Crazy Crank, Cool Harry, Sexy Bunny, and Brainy Orville offers a reader of a mix of humor and adventure as they run afoul, no pun intended, of mad scientists and dastardly villains. Think of it as a cross between Howard the Duck and Scooby-Doo.
Think of it as crap.
59 cents, you can get it off atomicavenue.com. Cory, I think we should slab that and maybe my fish police. We'll send it in and just as our folly.
And there was one black and white book that to this day I will still hold up as this was a decent book. Even though it has one of the worst names ever. Death Crazed Teenage Superheroes.
Wait. Wasn't that Rick Buckley? Didn't he do that?
No, it was 2 people who never went on to do anything else as far as I could tell.
What was that title?
Death Crazed Teenage Superheroes.
I love Atomic Avenue. It's all there. To it. Did you get both issues?
Yes, I did.
Oh, good. You got to keep a complete set. And it was published by Arf Arf. That alone is worth it.
Well, it was called that so that they would be very early in the catalog. They were one of the first publishing companies who said, hey, if our company starts with an A, we're in the front of the catalog.
This sounds so original. Jennifer, Chris, and Chance are 3 normal 13-year-old kids sitting in class one day when a bright light showed up and changed everything. Wow. Marvel stole that for their new universe, didn't they?
And the company name Arf Arf, I would translate that for you, but it's kind of dirty.
Yeah, we
What
don't.
a
There's
shock.
some things even an explicit show can't go into.
Yeah, and it's always lost in translation.
Yeah. But that's not what this show is about. We're not going to talk about bad black and white comics.
No, we're going to talk about comics that are good. And I thought, so we can have a little bit of order, we would start with Joe, and then go to Dan, and then Adam, and then me. And we'll just round robin it.
Wait, who's it? Round Robin, introduce yourself. Little shot.
I need a drink.
No, don't worry. I'll take the round robin section.
Oh, dear God.
You mean you don't have
Wolfie, sick.
80-some-year-old Burt Ward ready to chime in?
Well, old chum, I'll take care of it there from here then, yes. Holy comic books, Batman.
Wolfie, attack. Hump.
Joe,
Yes, sir.
what's number 10 on your list?
Well, let's see how much Cory knows about me. Cory, what is the first comic book that I claim started me on the road to collecting?
Amazing Spider-Man. I think
Yep.
it was 178.
You are correct. I actually have that one slabbed, the original one, just as an idea from Bo Smith. He says, I don't slab comics that are value. I slab comics that mean something to me. And that was the first comic I bought. And I went online and I checked up on Amazing Spider-Man because I read the entire run in the 80s, almost. It's the first one that I don't know if it came out in the 80s, probably came out 79, but issue 200 has a date of coming out in the 80s. And of course, that was the reintroduction of the burglar that had killed Uncle Ben. He had appeared somewhere before 178 as a one-shot ripping up Parker's home. Where did they live? The Queens or something?
Forest
Yes,
Hills.
Queens.
Forest Hill. So he ripped up that home, and then Peter, after a fight with, he thought Aunt May was dead. He pissed off all his friends when he realized Mysterio had something to do with it. After a really cool fight with the Kingpin, he finally arrived, and this is kind of where he discovers that Aunt May's alive. The burglar was there. The reason he was in the home to begin with, because he had heard that the home was, what would you, like mobsters lived in it in the 30s and left treasure behind, and Ben and May had found the treasure but had been eaten by silverfish. So, just more dumb reasons for Ben to have died. But it was for me as a kid, it was like, wow, this is pretty heady stuff. They had done a recap on issue 180, so I kind of knew, or was it 181? 181. So I knew pretty much all the backstory of Spider-Man. So this was kind of really cool stuff. And then it went into a Punisher crossover. He met the Dazzler. I think this was her, second appearance, maybe third, before she ended up getting her own book. And then Cory and I talked about this in the past. There was a string of one-shots that were just horrible. It was like Peter got up, he went out, fought a villain, he won, end of story. Next issue did the same. And this was like some edict from Shooter that everything had to be done in one. It was just, but for me, this is my golden age. So although I reread these stories, I don't think much of them. It was more interesting when it was actually a character that was like from the past, but these are just new characters, whatever, never to be seen again. But when you get to 229 is where the two-parter where he fights the Juggernaut, and things really started to turn around then, because they started to do two-parters, they started to do more interesting things. 238 was the first Hobgoblin, which was fascinating because it was somebody, they kept saying it was somebody that we knew in the past storyline. It wasn't like when the original Green Goblin showed up, it was just, Ditko wanted it to just be nobody. And then later on, I guess, was it Stan Lee and who was the artist at the time?
Johnny
was it Romita? Yeah, and then they made it Norm. Of course, that kind of got aborted later on, but, it was just one of those weird things. The black costume showed up. Now, here's the weird part, because around issue 297 is when I decided, you know what, I'm getting bored with this. I'm gonna quit. In one of my dumb adult moments. Cory, what happened with issue 298?
298 was the first appearance of Venom, kinda, sorta, and the first Toddy McFarlane issue.
Yeah, I kind of paid for that one, didn't I? Because later on, about 213, when this McFarlane chap was like taking the world by storm, I went back and I bought those. Not quite as inflated prices as they are now. I mean, that number 300 is legitimately a collector item book. I mean, I haven't even looked at it yet, but it's easily $500, if not more.
I traded it for a T-shirt.
So I want to know what I did with mine. I have none of these comics left, except the 178.
Wait, I have to ask Adam, what T-shirt?
It was a Wolverine T-shirt.
Oh, yeah.
It was like 14.
The 90s ended, I think, around 323. Eric Larson was doing the book, and it was still pretty fun run going on. And of course, this is before the Image stuff, which we'll talk about, I'm sure, when we get to the 90s books, or I should say the 80s ended. So, but for me, that was just, I mean, it was the first book I bought. It's probably one of those books I'll always buy. There's times where I drop it and then I wish I hadn't. But, and for the most part, with the purge I had at Comic-Con, can I say Comic-Con? This isn't aired in San Diego, is it? I got rid of most of those books. I mean, I still can get them Marvel Unlimited. I've got them through Essentials. I don't even know how high up they go. But, it was just a fun run. Kind of from my golden age of comics, around 12 or so, into almost right before the story of Hot Comics delved my way. So Amazing Spider-Man for me is definitely, I mean, I'm not taking these in order, but that's definitely number one on my list. Who's next, Cory?
Dan!
Okay, quick question for the order that you're asking. Are we going most important to least important, or least important to most important?
I'm going for 10 to 1.
10 to 1. Oh, just whatever's in. Okay, all right. And as I said earlier, I have to go back to the 80s because I didn't start writing or reading until the 90s, and my research for this episode was a little funny because I kept going, Oh, wait, that was like the 80s? No, January 1990. Okay, never mind.
I had a lot of that too, because I'm like, I remember this. Oh, too soon or too early. It belonged in our 70s episode.
So my number 10 is actually Grendel, The Devil's Legacy. Yeah, when it was a bound edition, it was actually called Grendel 2, so it took me a little while to find the actual date.
Grendel 2,
because I was
Electric
looking for the
Boogaloo.
Yeah. I don't have a long story for a lot of mine. Mine are just, it looked cool. It was a cool story.
When we were kids, that's half the battle, and you were lucky to even have a comic store that carried it in the first point.
Right. And when I read it, it was, I was high school years, so it was a female in a tight costume, so I was all there. But it was the first Grendel I actually read. I never read the first one at this point, and I loved the staff weapon. So it was just, it had vampires, it had this girl in a black outfit, and had a double pointed staff. I sat in the dark with a flashlight while reading this because I didn't, didn't want the
You
parents.
still do that?
in.
What's the point?
So Now I do other things with my hands.
And a
You wake me.
flashlight.
So that's my number 10. Adam, save me.
I have stories with everything because my kind of journey into comics is really heavily influenced by like the toys and cartoons and movies and like the pop culture of the 80s that I was into. So there are going to be some like oddball things on my list that aren't necessarily all comics, but are tied into like my development as a comic book fan. So my number 10 is a comic book series. It's the Alien stuff that Dark Horse was putting out in the late 80s. I loved Aliens. I saw Aliens when I was 11 years old at a slumber party. It was just new on video, and I mean that was just like this perfect storm. You're 11 years old, and it's just guns and shooting and monsters and all of this just cool shit when you're 11 and it's the 80s and you've seen tons of action movies already and are completely desensitized to everything. Still quote it to this day. Just one of my favorite movies of all time. And then Dark Horse started putting out the comics. And the comics in the 80s were like actually a continuation. And that was one of those things that was just, it was fantastic because it's like, well, where do the aliens come from? What's going on? All these questions that you wanted answers to, and didn't want really Scott answering them like 30 years later. So, I mean, the books, actually had Hicks and Newt and Ripley in them, and it, went on for a little while, and then I remember being really excited for Alien 3, and since it was, late 80s for that, I still think was that late 80s, early 90s for that movie?
Early
I don't
90s.
remember. Late 80s. Didn't have the internet, didn't really read up on things, didn't read a lot of Starlog, so didn't know what was really coming up with this movie, just saw that there was a new Aliens movie. Being a kid, 12, 13 years old, I thought we're going to go into this movie and it was going to be like an adaptation of what Dark Horse was doing in the comics. Boy, was I pissed off.
Boy, they should have.
Wait. Are you saying you were a Star Wars fan before it was cool?
A Star Wars fan?
Yeah,
Yes.
going in and saying that it didn't do what they wanted it to do, so they're all pissed off. So.
Oh, no. Well, yes, I was that way when I was, an adolescent. I didn't know. You know, the whole concept of like licensed comics was still kind of like newish to me, and I would just reread these Aliens comics because it was all that there was to follow up on this movie that I love so much. So my disappointment in Alien 3 was all related to the fact that it wasn't in the comic, because in the comic, Hicks and Newt are still alive, and in Alien 3, they kill Hicks and Newt, like, while the opening credits are playing, and it just, I hate Alien 3 to this day, and I know Dark Horse has gone back now, and on newer reprints of these books, have like retconned it, so the characters are no longer Hicks and Newt, they're like some other characters. I've never even reread it to see if it's actually Ripley that shows up at the very end to save their bacon, or if it's somebody they made up. I don't know. But those Aliens comics were like so huge to me at that point in my life, because I just wanted more Aliens no matter what it was.
You know what the coolest thing about Aliens is?
What, Wolfie?
I absolutely love a queen with two mouths.
Oh my.
My number 10 is the same as Dan's number 10 for different reasons.
Really?
Mine is the entire Grendel series.
Oh, okay.
I was a huge fan of Mage. And because of that, in the back of Mage, they ran the original Grendel, Hunter Rose, in a new format. It was kind of a mix of prose and art, because he had started a story back in a comic called Kamiko Primer, and then did 3 black and white issues. And then when Kamiko quit doing black and white, that's when Mage began. And he kind of finished up Hunter Rose's story in the back of Mage, and then Grendel was his next thing. And it jumped ahead, it jumped into the future, and the series became something very unique that wasn't done in comics. Matt Wagner would go and find new artists. He had the Pander brothers do the first 12 issues. He had Bernie Myroot do issues. He brought in all of these great artists, and the story would just keep jumping further into the future, kind of taking the character of Grendel and evolving it over time. And to this day, I can still go back and read those issues and find more there. Matt Wagner was not just doing a cool adventure series, which it was, but there was a philosophy behind it. There was something deeper behind it. And as the series grew and evolved, it changed every time. Dan, I don't know if you read the issues after the first 12, where, okay, the second Grendel has passed, and now one of her friends is kind of obsessed with Grendel.
Yeah, that was an interesting change. I like that.
Yeah, it got very experimental after that, and then it got into religion and on and on and on. And to me, it was one of those things that showed that comics were changing with the direct market. You know, the 70s, you kind of had influences from underground comics coming into Marvel. And then when Jim Shooter took over, those were all killed. And anybody involved in that, they were let go. And it was back to, no, comics are for children, and we do children's stories. But the direct market came in and went, no, we're going to continue taking this medium forward. And Grendel was one of those books that just kept moving the medium forward.
So the question I have, Cory.
Yes.
Do you still have the copy of Mage 6 that I had autographed by Matt Wagner and gave to you?
Yes, I do.
Yeah, that was kind of a gift. It must have been you were hanging at the shop or something. I had met him at one of the Cap City shows, and I brought that along and had him autograph it and gave it to you. And
he autographed it on the cover.
On the original run, that's the only one that actually has any heat because of Grendel's appearance.
Which is weird.
Mm.
Joe, what's your next book?
I cannot describe how mind-blowing this book was. And if you go back to when we did a talk with Angel, and was it the 70s? Was that the episode the last time we had him on, or did we just have him on for the?
We just had him on for fun.
But I had made in talking, I always talk about I don't understand how or when I discovered the multiverse in DC Comics, and I realized it was because I read Superman Family, and a lot of that had to do with like when the Superman from Earth 2 would visit, and they did all the referencing, and then of course they had the 100-pagers with the Golden Age reprints and that. So I knew the Infinite Earths, I knew Earth S, I knew Earth X, I knew Earth 1, 2, 3, and then Crisis on Infinite Earths hit. This had to be, and of course at the same time Marvel's Secret Wars was going on, but of the two, Crisis on Infinite Earths was ultimately mind-blowing. I was buying comics at the time at St. Paul Comics, and this also was during the period where Pat and I were buying comics to Comic-Cons, because we were kind of like the weekend warriors. We'd get together and try to get as many shows. So we'd see these coming, and Crisis, I probably ordered 10 copies of every issue. But I came in that day, and the comic shop owner, John Nunziata, he looked at me and goes, "Oh, yeah, they're playing for keeps on this one." I said, "Oh, yeah?" He goes, "Earth 3? No, it's gone." And he showed in the first couple panels how it got wiped out. And we were like, wow, this is going to be mind-altering. Granted, what came afterwards was kind of a hodgepodge of crap, because really, Marvel, I've read the background scenes of why DC didn't cancel everything and start with a number one, is what they should have done, because they were still transitioning from, like Cory said, the old school mentality where, well, we're the Wonder Woman group. We don't have to cross over with this if we don't want to. We're the Superman group. We're the Batman group. All the editors were their own little fiefdom. They had no one to force these guys to say, hey, this is going to be big. You're going to be affected. Deal with it. And there's tons of stories about how people dealt with it. I mean, Roy Thomas being, all the Silver Age guys or Golden Age guys being taken away. Some of the people, oh, well, this Crisis is doing good. We better have red skies, the red sky syndrome, where nothing happened, but the sky was red, therefore it was a crossover. The Crisis on Infinite Earths, of course, in the middle kind of gets bogged down, because I don't think they quite knew they were going. There's a lot of, go to this issue and follow this, go to that issue and follow this. But the beginning and the end, where they finally go against Anti-Monitor, I read this to this day, and my mind is still blown. I mean, I didn't get this feeling again until George Perez did the JSA Avengers crossover. I mean, his art was on form. The story, for the most part, was great. The crossovers were a lot of fun. It had people going crazy looking for back issues, especially the first appearance of the Monitor, which I believe his first mention was in New Teen Titans. Cory, I'll ask this road, what was his first actual appearance?
His first actual appearance was in GI Combat.
Yeah.
And that's why in GI Combat,
was buying that book.
Crazy.
Nobody was buying that book. I mean, and, I can't, I'm just babbling now, but the Crisis on Infinite Earth was such a monumental, outstanding story. Even in my little brain at the time, and again, this was probably college age at the time. I couldn't understand why DC just didn't cancel everything and start with a number one, and they kind of did. They did with Wonder Woman. We got Man of Steel, which I guess is going to be repeating itself, isn't it? Oh,
yes,
well.
It is.
We're not going to bend us over for that one. Anyways, just,
God.
it was even to this day, you can either point to it as the end of DC or the beginning of something cool. It was probably, I don't know. I'm not going to get into what the DC kind of revisited the Crisis every so often, but I mean, I just remember people going back. What was I can't think of it. Green Lantern considered the first Crisis story. Which issue was that?
It was in the 40s.
Yeah, it was a Silver
40 something.
Yeah, and
it was 40 Green Lantern 45, 46, somewhere around there.
And then there was the crossover with the Golden Age Green Lantern and the Silver Age, and the first time they fought Kronos, and just people were going nuts trying to find these back issues, and that's something that I'll revisit as we keep going forward, because back then, again, no eBay, your local comic shop. I don't even know how we learned. Like you'd suddenly hear, oh, did you know the first Monitor was in GI Combat? I got to find me an issue. Well, you ain't going to find an issue. So finding these issues and getting them priced to go to market was something big. I mean, when Batman came out with Michael Keaton and the Joker was the villain, boom, Joker appearances went insane. So, and that was just a fun part of the thing. And Crisis drove everybody crazy because, all the characters that were appearing, that were disappearing, that were being killed, first appearances, it like woke up the comic industry. Even to this day, like I said, it's a fantastic read. And of course, I remember when the Absolute came out, and it was never, ever going to be in softcover. Don't you believe it?
There was a local artist here in the Minneapolis area who said that he had been told repeatedly that Crisis would never be revisited or reprinted. They were just going to leave it as a placeholder in time. And then 2 years later, he did a comic that kind of smoothed out all the bumps that had happened since Crisis on Infinite Earths. So DC has changed their mind about Crisis a lot over the years.
Well, and even with that Convergence crud, they decided, hey, you know what? The multiverse is still here. Ta-da! While we were all busy watching the Anti-Monitor and Darkseid get it on in Justice League, they kind of quietly brought back the whole multiverse.
Well, that came back
done a thing with it.
That came back in Identity Crisis, didn't it? Because Infinite Crisis, yeah.
Well, that was when that's when they came up with the idea. There's only 52 of them.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're back to that now, but then there's the Dark Universe. Anyway.
And the Watchmen universe. And the Watchmen babies.
Dan, what's your number 9?
Number 9 for me is the Silver Surfer series that started in 88, 89, because which is volume 3, I believe.
Yes, because there was a one-shot by Byrne.
Yeah.
That was considered volume 2.
Yes, one comic. That was and my reasoning for that one goes into the first comic that wasn't based on a cartoon like Transformers and stuff, which I know we'll talk about eventually. Silver Surfer was the first one I picked up in the 90s. It was a number 50. We've talked about this on the show before. This leads right into Infinity Gauntlet, which is my holy grail of comics for me. It's what's got me started into the mainstream comics. It's been my favorite ever since. Thanos has been my favorite villain ever since, blah, blah, blah. But I started with 50 of that series. And, of course, that got me to go back and read all of them leading up. And I was disappointed for a little bit of it. But that's a whole nother story. It took a little bit for them to get their legs under the character again, it seemed. Or they decided to give it to somebody who had no idea what they were doing, one of the two. So that would be my number 9 because it it started in the 80s, but it led up to what really, really got me into comics. And Thanos showed up a couple times throughout through the first part of the series, so I was happy. So really, if you put Thanos correctly in a story, I'm going to just, yeah. Sorry, I'm more clean thought than Wolfie is, but
shocked, I tell you.
I know.
Don't worry, I'll tell you. Yeah, he sits there and orgasms for hours. Unfortunately, then he can't read the comic because he can't open the damn thing.
Well, if you didn't start with the Tijuana Bibles, you'd probably be better off.
How about you, Adam? What's your number 9?
My number 9 would be it'd be Akira.
Oh.
Ooh.
So yeah, one of the things that happened to me as we started getting closer to the end of the 80s was starting to get really, really into anime and manga. And that was, for a little while throughout the 90s, I was actually a little bit more into anime and manga than I was into regular comics. I didn't buy as many comics. I spent oodles and oodles of cash on anime videotapes.
Back when you really had to look for that stuff.
Yes. Or you had a buddy whose older brother went to Truman State University and was near Splash Page Comics, who back in the early 90s had one of the largest collections of anime videos around and would rent them out for $1 a cassette for a week, and his older brother would come back with these massive amounts of anime on tape from dubbing parties and let us run off with things like Akira and Battle Angel Alita and 3x3 Eyes and Tenchi Muyo and Ranma 1/2, just all this classic late 80s, early 90s anime that we would then squeeze as many episodes as we could onto one 8-hour tape. And and it's all Akira's fault. It's all Marvel bringing Akira over for their epic line and really kind of cementing my love of manga and anime after starting to get into it as a kid through things like G-Force and Robotech and Voltron and odd videos being rented from various video stores around the southeast Iowa region. Things I don't even remember the names of. I just knew it was stuff from Japan. So, plus, the Akira comic is well, no pun intended, since it was published by Epic. It's epic. I mean, it goes into so much more than the 2-hour movie could ever do. So there's this whole middle section about the religious fanatics and everything that just really is only kind of really minorly touched upon in the movie. So, but and it, I don't know, it really, I think, kind of prepared me for a guy like Joe Madureira coming on the X-Men and getting what he was doing at a time where anime and manga still wasn't quite so mainstream. So I thank Akira for that.
I will say, though, on your statement of all we knew is it came from Japan, is somebody going, no, it came from Japan, and you put it in and suddenly you became a man.
See, my first introduction to manga was Frank Miller.
Really?
Yep, Miller did interviews about the build-up to Ronin, and he said that he was really into this Japanese manga stuff, and his favorite series was Lone Wolf and Cub.
Oh.
So when first started reprinting Lone Wolf and Cub, for the first 12 issues, it had covers by Frank Miller.
That's
Oh,
right.
nice.
So that's my first manga. And the thing is, I don't have as many fond memories of Akira because of the 3-year gap.
Yeah, it was huge.
It was like, oh, and then nothing came out, and the movie came out and everything, and then Marvel announced, there's more Akira. Really? There is?
Yeah, and some of those later issues of Akira, like 36, 37, 38, I believe, are worth some money. Because nobody was buying them.
Yeah.
because of that. But yeah, and what's really cool, you bring up how Frank Miller, in interviews talking about being influenced by manga. If you go back and look at some of like John Romita Jr.'s early artwork, especially on Daredevil, you could see some really heavy 80s manga influence in the artwork, like the way he draws the hair, the way he draws some of the faces, the way he draws Matt Murdock's glasses. It's like all right there. And it's really cool to like kind of go back, 30 some years now and see those influences where at the time it wasn't, it wasn't really there. It wasn't something that a lot of people knew about.
And I think one of the biggest influences through the 90s and now is that you've got more artists who tell stories visually, whereas the panel-to-panel continuity, especially at Marvel in the 70s and 80s, was very non-existent. It was very much where panel layouts were very bland. It felt very DC in the 50s and 60s. That's what Shooter liked. He wanted that sort of storytelling. Whereas you had your more visual artists, when a more visual artist would show up at Marvel, they would explode, and then eventually they'd go over to DC so that they could still tell their stories visually without being told, no, it's got to be a 6-panel grid. No, the panels all have to be the same size. Blah, blah, blah. My number 9 book is one that lasted from the 80s to the 90s, but it started in 85 and went for over 10 years, and that was Peter David's run on the Hulk. And we've talked about it recently on the show. When Peter David took over the Hulk, it was really because nobody else wanted to do it. Peter David was a guy who worked in the sales department, and he'd written a few Spider-Man stories, and I guess John Byrne left the Hulk in a huff, one of the first series he left in a huff. Well, maybe it was a minute and a huff. But he left in the middle of a story, and Al Milgrom came in and sort of wrapped it up, but he was an editor, and he was also kind of the guy who, this book needs to get inked over a weekend. Give it to Al, he'll do it. So he was kind of overwhelmed, and he didn't want to be on the Hulk. So they were trying to find somebody to do it, and Peter David, hey, it's going to get canceled anyway. Let that Peter David guy write it, and maybe he'll leave us the hell alone. And I remember at the time when he took over, he put, I don't know if it was an article or a letter or what, but he said, everybody who writes me about the Hulk will get a return letter. So I read his first couple issues, sent him in a thing saying I really like the idea that you're not going back to the, the child Hulk, and you're, trying new stuff. And he sent the cover to one of the future issues by Todd McFarlane and was like, yeah, we're really getting exciting about this. Todd's not going to be able to do the type of layouts he did on Infinity Incorporated, but I think you'll still like his art. And now when you think of the Hulk, it's pretty rare you think of the Hulk that was big, that was the big character through the 70s, the big childlike Hulk that just smashes stuff. You think of the more complicated character that Peter David made the character into. It's one of those runs I want to go back and read, but I don't know if it'll have the same impact as it did the fact that it came out every month and it never stayed in one place. He was always changing the character up before it got boring. And
you mean you didn't put the comic in the same place?
No.
Oh.
I mean, come on, you had Mr. Fix-It, you had the Intelligent Hulk, you had the Hulk with the Pantheon, you all of those different versions of the character. And while a lot of it you think of as the 90s, it started in 85. So he was on the Hulk for a long damn time.
Yeah.
Probably even longer than Sal Buscema. Joe, what's your number 8?
Number 8 is, as I was thinking about it, I was trying to narrow down what titles. Cory, who originally published the titles Alien Worlds and Twisted Tales?
That was Pacific.
And then who published it?
Eclipse did like a couple issues after Pacific went under.
Yep. And I had to stop and think, I'm going to have to give my next spot to Pacific Comics and Eclipse Comics. And again, I had a retailer who carried them, but I have an affinity for independent comics. There's some people, and I ran into them, of course, when I had the comic shops, did not care if it wasn't DC, if it wasn't Image, wasn't Marvel. They didn't care. And I'm just not that way. And it's probably because I read a shit ton of Pacific Comics. I'm just looking down the list, courtesy of Wikipedia. Alien Worlds, which I mentioned earlier. You know, just a ton of different writers. Bruce Jones was the big one. Ton of different artists, different stories. Twisted Tales with just a crazy bowling cover. Again, Bruce Jones writing it. A lot of different art styles, horror stuff. But it's just a who's who. Bold Adventures, Captain Victory, Eric of Melonbone, Gru, The Wanderer, Joe Kerbert's first folio, The Missing Man, Rocketeer. And then when Pacific closed and went under, a lot of those titles, the Alien Worlds, continued on to Eclipse, and I started reading that. I mean, yeah, there was Adolescents, Radioactive, Black Belt Hamsters, but there was Airboy, there was Air Maiden Special, Alec Toth's Zorro, Appleseed. We were talking manga earlier. And that's just the A's. I mean, you can go down. There were things like Captain EO 3D that I picked up, which, if you had now, is quite a pretty penny, I think, for the only Michael Jackson comic that's came out. Coyote came out. Crossfire from Mark Evanier. Detectives Inc. It's a who's who of stuff that I was exposed to. Dirty Pair. And as you can tell, I'm just trying to get down the list, trying to find some of the good stuff. The Hobbit. You know, I Am
Miracle
Legend.
Man.
Oh, yes. I haven't gotten to the M's yet. And there's a few other titles that I'll talk because they're going to have their own specific stuff. The Psychic Girl. Just tons and tons of different stuff. It veered into some of the original stuff. You know, they had the official crossover indexes, which for a geek like me was fun. I mean, Crisis, Infinite Earths, you know, the type of continuity stuff that we used to argue about. Well, here somebody did and put it down. The Price by Jim Starlin. And if you don't know what that is, well, we might talk about it a little bit later. This is probably what ignited the love of independent comics for me more than anything else. The fact that I actually had these in my collection. I have them in my collection. Started with Pacific. It continues with Eclipse. Both companies gone. But, man, when I sit down, and today was box day, which was pretty cool for my birthday, I've got the previews, and I'm ready just to go through it. And, yeah, I'll keep an eye on what DC's doing. I'll keep an eye on Marvel. But I look close at Image, Dark Horse, Oni. I look for the independents in there, you know, because there's probably more stuff that I wish I'll read than I'll actually have time to read. And I can't overestimate or oversell just how much these two companies affected the type of comic collector I am. And the fact that I'm willing, you know, like when MSP Comic Con 2018 shows up, May 19th and 20th, 2018 at the Minnesota State Fairground. And of course, if you go to their website, mcbacomiccons.com, everything's active. You want a table, you want to be a guest, you want to buy advanced tickets. Everything's live, everything's ready to rock. And of course, I'll be there with my daughters doing the charity booth. So if you've got something you want to donate for charity, give me a quick email through Cory's hotline or whatever. But
I hope I'm back.
I hope so too. They've got they're asking people to send in invites because they're trying to get everybody in, and you know, that would be an excellent place for you to go looking for some of these yearbooks. You know what I'm talking about? So, anyways, that's the big number 3 for me. What's up for you, Dan?
Number 3. Wait, did we
He's
lose
doing
time?
it weird.
Oh, okay.
I'm doing it by most important.
So we're at number 8.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, third comic. It depends on which way you go.
I go both ways.
I know. See, Wolfie gets it.
Yeah. Okay, number 38.
Quite a bit.
Ooh.
My number 8 is actually the Dark Phoenix saga from X-Men. Happened 84? No.
80 and
Jean
81.
Grey dies on the moon September 1st, 1980.
Oh, it was right at the beginning. That's right. 1980, yes.
The same day Madeline Pryor is the lone survivor of a plane crash.
Shocking.
Oh.
Boy, did they screw that plot up.
Yeah, really.
And again, is there any plot that they didn't screw up on the X-Men eventually? What, Dark Phoenix saga, Dan.
Never mind. I don't want to talk about it anymore. I liked it. I liked it again. I think it was one of the first X-Men stories I actually read. Really, one of the things that I liked about it was just something that it was kind of, I don't want to say throwaway because it came back, but the thing is when they were going to the Hellfire group, club after Jean Grey had already been taken, and they were down in the sewers, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Wolverine just turns and slashes electrical wires. And they're like, "What the hell are you doing?" Just in case. Like, what? And then of course it actually comes in handy later on. But it was just that, just in case. What? It was that it was good writing that, they kind of threw in lines that didn't make sense until later, but at the time it was really kind of funny. I loved of course, the Hellfire Club. So once again, adolescent boy, loves the costumes. Plus,
I still love the costume.
John Byrne could draw a Phoenix.
Yeah.
Oh, there's that one double-page spread when the X-Men are in the Savage Land, and it's like Storm all sprawled out. It's like, yeah, when I was like 13, getting into X-Men 12, 13, I was like, yeah, I'm not gay.
That was one thing about the X-Men early on. Storm was dropping her clothes every chance she could.
Yes.
I think it was like the X-Men 102 where they go to the 101 where they go to Banshee's castle. And she's ripping her clothes off and flying naked in the storm just because she's, needs a bath.
I think it's 103 and 104 with the Leprechaun.
There was a scene there where, and I don't know which issue, where they're like, Storm, you have to wear this. Why? I am never cold. It's like, I'll do it on my half.
No wonder she got Black Panther's attention, The other thing is also the Phoenix Force itself. When they showed it, I loved the fire bird. And in all honesty, every time somebody mentions a phoenix, that's what I picture, not the bird with feathers.
Dan, I have a question. Did you ever read the one shot where they showed how the story was supposed to end until Shooter came in and said, hey, you know what? She wiped out a whole planet of people, including these guys who appeared in an early issue of Avengers. She has to die. And so what they did is, as a one shot, they published what happened if she didn't die. And
was that what if? Was that a what if story, or was that
it was just it was a standalone, I think.
Phoenix, the Untold Story.
Yes.
Yeah, and there was a one shot that came out. What if Phoenix didn't die? Which was just republished as a one of the True Believer books. But if you haven't ever read that, I'll dig a copy up and have you read it because it's real interesting what they were going to do versus what they did.
No, I'd love to read that.
Yeah, because you read it, and even Claremont went back and he changed the original line between the Beast when he was just trying to be a goofus and try to run away so he could alert the Avengers, and to what was written in the actual comic. And then there was one where Wolverine, his thoughts weren't about Jean or that he understood. He was thinking about, Cory, help me here, the Japanese woman he later married.
Mariko
Oh, Mariko.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating just to read the changes Chris did, which made 137 a stronger story. So, yeah, I'll definitely dig that sucker out and borrow it to you whenever I see you again.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see that. So thank you.
Sure.
So speaking of which, Adam?
Okay. This is where I kind of veer off from comic books, but it's still comic book related. My number 8, it's the Sears and J.C. Penney's Christmas catalogs from the 80s. And
Hey, whoa. That was my first job ever, is working Sears catalog. I don't want to hear anybody bad-mouthing Sears catalog.
Oh, no.
I know you're not, but I'm talking to the gigglers over there.
Okay.
Hey, I'll be honest. Sears was my first job too. I was actually a model for them when I was like 1. So, wow, silence. I love it.
No,
I'm telling the truth in this case.
I'm trying to figure out which issue of Sears catalog that was, but never mind.
That was the 70s.
And Wolfie just liked the bra pages.
Damn straight. No, I like the underwear pages too.
Okay.
Yeah. Because,
Well-
I like the bumps.
Yeah. Anyway,
So back to your childhood memories of this
Yes,
wonderful story. Yes.
it was one of those things that I would do at my grandma's house. She would get both of these catalogs every year. They'd always show up right around August. And, we'd go over there for Sunday night dinner, and all I would do was pour through these catalogs, the toy section, to see what I wanted for Christmas. And every year, there was always a comic book set, like a pack. You get like 25 or 30 miscellaneous comic books.
Oh, yes.
And that was always one of those things that would have the multiple circles around it. So every Christmas, I would get like 25, 30 Marvel comics. It was always just like random stuff. And that was how I learned about the Marvel Universe. They're kind of like my Marvel trading cards that you hear some of the people that come on Panels and Pizza talk about, how it's like, this was my introduction to Marvel. These 25, 30 comic book sets were how I learned about everybody in the Marvel Universe in comic book form. Outside of reading Transformers and G.I. Joe, which those will be mentioned a little bit later, one of them next episode. It's also the introduction into what is going to be my number 1 comic in part 2 of this. So if it wasn't, let's restart. These catalogs, these 2 catalogs with the comics that I would get for Christmas every year, were just like such a huge building block for me and the foundation of my comic book reading.
It's kind of fun because I ordered them too, but I ordered them because, again, I was doing the Weekend Warrior shtick, so I was always looking for the rare one that I could sell, and if not, I know I could just blow them out at cover price anyways. But, Adam, did you ever get the Best of Marvel Comics volume that they offered? It was a red cover thing, volume 1, only offered through Sears catalog.
Not that I remember, Joe.
Because, yeah, I got that. I mean, they're running like $50 on eBay now, some less if they're damaged. And that was kind of a who's who, too, because it introduced origin stories of Fantastic Four, Hulk, Spider-Man, and all that fun stuff. Because that was one of those, too. I circled, I want this. And I said, screw it, I just ordered it for myself. But, yeah, it was fun. I mean, it was weird because it would be like, Marvel's selling all these crappy comics, and I don't recall. They had to have been, were they newsstand or were they direct market?
They were all direct market stuff because
Okay.
I would get some duplicates. I remember having like doubles of Transformers 7 and 8, and my duplicates from the Christmas sets had the direct market, like the Black Spider-Man face and the UPC box where my newsstand stuff didn't, where I was getting out the spinner rack.
Yeah.
My number 8 book.
Oh, I misspoke, by the way. That book's $150 if you can find it mint.
Wow, how'd you
My
know?
number
You haven't
8
even
book.
said what it was. We're not going to let you talk, Cory.
My number 8 book
I know.
Number 3.
is actually, I can remember the number that this run started at because they made it a big deal even though it was not an anniversary issue. All I have to do is mention the issue number, and I'm betting that at least Joe will know what run I'm talking about. Issue 337.
Oh!
Well, what's happened when Wolfie gets a hold of Dan? He becomes very Thor.
Walt Simonson came on to Thor with issue 337, and Thor was one of those books that when during the 70s, I loved it. You had Len Wein and John Buscema, and then Len Wein left and Roy Thomas took over. And Roy Thomas did a fantastic job leading up to issue 300, and he left before issue 300, and it was finished by Mark Grunwald and, who wrote it with him?
300?
Yeah, issue 300 was Mark Grunwald and Ralph Macchio.
Yeah.
And it was drawn by Keith Pollard. And then it just kind of fell apart. Doug Mensch, who does really good comics, did not do a good job on Thor. And it became another book like with Amazing Spider-Man, where it's okay, it's a bunch of one-shot stories that who gives a damn. And then Walt Simonson came on, and there's that cover with Beta Ray Bill destroying the logo.
Oh,
And we were all just, what the hell is going on here? And Walt Simonson had probably the best run on Thor since Kirby. But yeah, Walt Simonson's run on Thor, he wrote and drew it for a while, and then when he quit drawing it, you had Sal Buscema come on. And I remember at the time a lot of people were like, Sal Buscema. But for me, Buscema was able to do the same sort of thing that Simonson did. It wasn't as flashy, but it was still as cool. And Joe, have you rejoined us?
I have.
All right. Joe, what is your number 7 or number 4 or whatever the hell numbering system you're using?
I just make them up as I go along.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't surprise me. For me, I'm going to go into something that's probably dead. I'm going to talk about newsprint and, of course, the Comic Buyer's Guide. This was a newspaper, started in 71, and the last issue made it all the way to 2013. I remember picking up the first issue sometime in the early 80s and thinking, oh, this is so cool. I just sat on it. A couple months later, I read it, and then I'm realizing, oh, this is time sensitive. Maybe that's why it's weekly. And from there, I just went ahead and got a subscription to it. And it was one of the things I look forward to is getting it in the mail every week. Yeah, it was published by Krause. And, of course, I enjoyed not only the editorials that were in there, but they had cartoons. That's how I got into Fred Hembeck. It's how I became aware of Mark Avanier, Peter David, Tony Isabella. I love Tony Isabella's reviews. There was a guy, Mr. Silver Age, and of course I can't remember his name. He would talk about Silver Age comics, and of course the best part, of course, was the letter column. Nowadays, with eventually got replaced by
message board.
Yeah, message boards, and that's where people started to get a voice because you had to be really articulate in order to be published by anybody in Comic Buyer's Guide. I think it was any newspaper, and I think that's why social media is so prevalent because you used to be, in order to get into a newspaper, you had to get past the editor, which is why you kept seeing certain people being published almost constantly. And it was a joy to read from cover to end. And then I'd go back and I'd look at the ads. Actually, I should mention Markovania was until like 1994, but it was just a lot of fun to read, and again, it exposed me to different things. It was the way to find different back issues. I know the one ad Pat and I tried in the Comic Buyer's Guide didn't really work that well, so we never really did it again. And the one ad we responded to was actually some guy scamming. So we like sent a $200 check for all these hot comics and never got anything. And the guy got busted and thrown out. But after that we just kind of didn't really. Well, we both subscribed to it, but we didn't really place ads or do anything with it. But just a good magazine. Eventually, well, I should say newspaper. I don't have any of them. I have a few downstairs. They're just a victim of the times. They started getting smaller. They dropped columnists. They dropped the comic strips. Eventually, it went to a monthly magazine, and then eventually they just folded all together. But Comic Buyer's Guide was just one of the highlights of my week, waiting for it to come in the mail. I don't even know if there's any even collectability in any of that, because like I said, they were all in newsprints. With the exception of the later magazines, most of them probably just fizzled out. And really, between Comic Buyer's Guide, Comics Journal, which tend to take a more detailed view, especially when some of these companies like Pacific and Eclipse and Triumph, whatever, would go under. You'd never hear the story, but you'd find out because Comics Journal would find out. And I think Amazing Heroes was being published at the time, which is fun to look at now because it's a list of all these comics that were published. There's swimsuit issues that came out. And that was pretty much it. I don't even know when Wizard started publishing. But, that was...
92 or 93.
So, yeah, that's a decade away. But this is how we got our information when you weren't using whatever the distributor catalog was that was in your area. And we had Advanced Comics, so we were aware of Diamond. We saw Heroes Worlds occasionally, but we never really ordered out of them because very, very few retailers in my area ordered from them. I mean, we were like a state over from Capital City, and we had a Cap City warehouse right in town, so they kind of dominated this area. And we saw how well that ended up in the 90s, but so that would be probably one of the big things for me, definitely in the 80s, was waiting for that weekly Comic Buyer's Guide to pop in the mail. Dan?
Well, my number 7 actually is Batman: Death in the Family.
That made me a lot of money off that.
Me too.
You did?
Oh, God, yeah.
I voted to kill the bastard.
Oh, in that way. Well, here's the funny thing is, it's my number 7. I've never read it. I just love the background to the entire story. The whole thing that you got to call in and vote to kill him or let him live. It was our first American Idol. I mean, come on.
It was. And there were stories of people calling. I called multiple times. I called once. That was it. Now, maybe Cory.
I just bought up tons of copies, and then 6 months later sold them.
Oh, they were hot. hot. Now the question is, were they always going to kill him, or was there actually plans to keep him alive?
What it is, if he didn't die, he was still going to be written out of the book for a while, and I think in one of the deluxe versions of it, they actually show the stuff that Aparo drew showing that he had lived.
Okay.
Because basically they drew it both, and then however the vote went, that's what they sent to the printer.
Yeah,
I've seen mentioned this, Dan?
What?
I was just explaining to someone at work, or trying to explain the whole Jason thing, because he knows Jason as Hush. And I was
Jason isn't Hush.
I don't know, I haven't read it yet. But I was trying to, I have it, and then my daughters took it. That's the story of my life. But originally when Jason showed up, he was almost a mirror image of Dick Grayson. I think it was Batman or Dick Grayson, or somebody was at a circus and
yes,
his family was killed. it did bring up an interesting storyline when he was fighting for the adoption of Jason. I think what was the villain's name? I want to say Natasha, but that's
Nocturna.
Nocturna, yeah.
Because Bruce Wayne had to fight it because Batman couldn't win the fight, and they ended up where Jason got adopted eventually by Bruce, and the best part is in Tales of the Titans 50, the marriage between Donna Troy and whoever the nobody was, where they actually talk, and Bruce or Dick asked, "Why didn't you adopt me?" You know, so there are signs of it in other DC comics. And then out of nowhere, they just, hey, you know, Jason's a punk that was jacking the Batmobile. Really?
Yeah.
I think I dropped at that time, and I didn't pick up again until Death in the Family, because we saw it coming, and I don't remember if there was controversy. Again, through Comic Buyers Guide, I don't know if there was controversy in it or not, but I voted to kill that mother. Right, that you could get about a fictional character.
I think most people voted to kill him because they didn't think DC would go through with it.
Well, and he was a very unlikable character from what they originally made him. And Cory, you know this stuff backwards and forwards. Why did they make such an abrupt change?
Because what it was, Denny O'Neil came on as editor, looked at Jason Todd's origin, and went, "No, we can't have him have the exact same origin as the original Robin. Let's have him be kind of a street smart kid who Batman is going to bring over to to the light side." And Jim Starlin hated the idea of a kid sidekick. So when he wrote the character very unlikable, to the point where through his inaction someone died. And Starlin was just angling to get rid of Robin one way or the other. Now, the thing is, once Starlin did the story where Robin's killed, he's not on Batman anymore.
To me, it was such an abrupt change, and it was so annoying because they had spent so much time trying to streamline continuity with Crisis, and then they'd pull this shit, and you're like, really? Couldn't you just, I suppose they did it later with Green Lantern, but just have him go like nuts or become likable and, let somebody die. But I suppose, like you said, they would always be back. Oh, he was Bruce's legal son and he died. He got better.
I was actually very surprised when they brought him back because he was one of those, he stayed dead for a long time. Adam, what's your next one?
Oh, my next one. It is almost copying Joe, but not Comic Buyer's Guide. Comic Scene Magazine.
Oh wow, from Starlog.
Yeah. I was gonna ask if that was the same group as Starlog who did that. That was like way pre-Wizard. And that was kind of the beginning of me understanding that there was like more out there than just the superhero stuff that was on the spinner rack at Hy-Vee. So I remember looking at this thing and being this completely enamored with the advertisements for a book called Trouble with Girls.
Yes!
And realizing again, I liked sexy pinup ladies. I think I was just like a horny 11-year-old. I don't know, but
we all.
I guess. It ties into my love of anime. I remember there being an advertisement in it for Dangayo, and the artwork for this video cassette just blew my mind. And I remember sitting there thinking, how can I get $39.95 to order this? Because again, I'm a kid, and I'm maybe making $5 a week allowance at this point in my life. So $40 seems like an impossibility.
Who's going to write the check for you? You got to mail
give me
it.
the money order.
Yeah.
There's no way I could go to my mom and dad and say, "Can I have $40 for a cartoon?" They would have said I was nuts.
That's a story I tell, where I asked my mom for $50 to buy a Superman #1. What? No. Here's $10. Go buy something else.
Whew, Mom.
I know.
But my absolute favorite thing about this magazine was the I don't even remember the name of the segment, but it was just like the little breakdown of all the different movies that were in development, all the different comic book movies, and when they were supposed to be out, and who was going to be playing what character. And I think it would be really interesting to go back and look at some of these old comic scene magazines and see how many of those actually even panned out.
None.
Yeah.
I know.
Like James Cameron's X-Men and stuff like that.
I remember back when I worked at a movie theater in the 80s, when the Cannes Film Festival would happen, we got Variety every week, and Variety that week would be, like over 600 pages, because it would be all the movies that they're trying to get financing for. And it would just be filled with these superhero movies that never saw the light of day. The canon version of Spider-Man, which, to be honest, I would probably have bought every copy.
Well, the Walter, what's that guy? That big fat detective Cannon?
No, Canon Films, the people who gave us, let's see, the King Solomon's Mines with Richard Chamberlain, or Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo.
Didn't they release the Dolph Lundgren Punisher?
No, I think they were dead by then.
Okay.
But they did do the fourth Superman movie.
That's it, yeah.
But they ran ads for Spider-Man, and I tell you what, I would have bought the VHS tape. I then would have bought the Laserdisc. I would have bought the DVD, and now I'd be buying the Blu-ray, because I have a deep abiding love of crap. And good Lord, everything I've read about that movie would have been complete crap.
But it was such a great magazine, just because it would get your imagination going with, oh my God, what would it be like if they made this movie and if this person was in it? And as a kid, I mean, that was some of the most fun things to do, was sit around with your other comic book reading friends and talk about, well, what if?
Yep.
And you don't really get to do that as much anymore, since there's a new comic book movie out every 2 to 3 months. So,
and people hate on things before they're even out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Wait, you had other comic book reading friends?
A couple.
He's exaggerating. We existed in a universe all our own. We were picked on. We were nerds. We were geeks. Except when it was slow time at school. Hey, Ryder, got any of them comic books I can read? No.
It was Iowa. There was nothing else to do but, tassel corn.
Except mind your own business and Iowa.
True enough.
You played Palladium role-playing games and read comics. Oh.
There you go.
Palladium? Oh, God.
Ninja Turtles, Robotech. Yeah.
Hey, could have been worse, Dan. Could have been Mayfair.
Okay.
So, Cory, number 7.
Yes. Nexus by Mike Barron and Steve Rude. That was one of the first comics that, when I hit the first comic shop I'd ever been in, they had a big old stack of Nexus number 3, the magazine size with the flexi disc. And it was a flexi disc with a comic. It's $3, man. And that was when Marvel was 75 cents. It's $2.95. But then eventually they were trying to get rid of them, so they had them at half price, and I bought it then. And I just fell in love, and it was through Capital Comics, which was a publishing company from Cap Cities, the distributor, and they quit publishing comics, and it was, so Badger's gone, and Nexus is gone, and Whisper's gone. Well, First Comics picked them up, and I got to tell you, man, that first 50 issues of Nexus, Baron and Rude were firing on all cylinders. They were creating stuff you'd never seen in comics before. It was true science fiction. And then when Steve Rude needed to step back, Paul Smith came in and drew it, right fresh from his X-Men run.
What? I didn't know that bit.
Yeah. So Nexus was just an amazing comic. And it was one of those that when first went under, it was heartbreaking because Dark Horse never was able to get it right. And Steve Rude keeps trying to bring it back, and it just keeps kind of sputtering. And even though, it's still Baron and Rude, the magic is gone on Baron's writing for the character. It's not as innovative, it's not as fun, it's not as science fiction-y. But I tell you what, go to Dark Horse and pick up those Nexus omnibuses. That's some reading that, if you've not read those books, it is mind-blowingly good. Joe,
I like that.
Your last book for part 1.
This book has a 2-part love affair with me because, first of all, it was the first book that me and my comic book partner and a third partner who dropped out afterwards bought. And we bought it with the intention of, we're going to buy these and sit on them and invest them and sell them a little later. And we're going way back to 1982 when we picked up the first issue of the brand new series, The Saga of the Swamp Thing. Ooh. And I mean, again, if I had an original copy from that purchase, I would slap it just for keepsake. Because really, there's no reason to buy or read 1 through 19. Well, I suppose you could. I mean, it's whatever. Because nobody was paying attention to it, which allowed some young British punk by the name of Alan Moore to take issue 20, totally turn the concept of Swamp Thing on its head, and make it a powerhouse that eventually, along with Sandman, which, again, the first issue, although it was 89, really hit its stride in the 90s, created the Vertigo line. I think by the time issue 29 hit, before the annual that wrapped up the whole going to hell thing, issues were already popping up in price and going very, very expensive. And I can't tell you how long it was until I picked up on number 21. And then I realized, I had to pick up number 20, which was the first issue. Although Stephen Bissett didn't do the art. He did the art in 19. Some people picked up that thinking it was a little hot. But really, the heat started with 20. And these were just mind-bogglingly, mind-blowing comics. Between that and reading the Pacific line and reading things like Crisis, I mean, I was reading some of the best stuff that was even out there. And because the comics were hot, they were hard to find, but eventually you could find them. You go to one of the comic shows or you hit a comic shop back then you bus around wherever you needed to go. I remember going to one of the early shows that I went to, and Pat and I had set up, and a guy had a run of Swamp Thing from like 20 to 25, and I was like, he wanted $50 for him. I was like, I'll drop $50 on it. And some of a bitch wouldn't sell them to me. I don't know if I want to sell them. I think I want to keep them. And I'm like, dude, you got them sitting on your table with fucking prices on them, and you're not selling. What the hell are you even here for? If you paid not to sell comics. Which is, what the hell was I? I was a punk high schooler chewing out this guy. I'm lucky he didn't jump over the table and kill me. But fuck, what an idiot. Fine, you kept him. I bought him somewhere else.
I'm sorry, I zoned out for a minute. Did you say you were chewing somebody out?
I was. I have now been picking these slowly up in the book form, the paperback, and I think I've gotten through annual 1. No, I take that back. I got it all the way through because when it hit number 45, I think they officially changed it to just Swamp Thing. And by the time you get to issue 50, that's where they end up going toe-to-toe with the Darkness. There was a Crisis tie-in. Again, this is back when Vertigo lines could tie into the regular DC universe. So when Karen Berger came along later and said, nope, ain't happening, I thought she was kind of stupid on that. But, at number 50, of course, who bet the big one in number 50? For a dime?
I remember 50 was it was a double-sized issue and it tied into Crisis, but I don't remember who died.
Sargon, the Golden.
Oh, that's right.
Died
because they were doing the seance thing.
Yeah, and every time the black goo or whatever it was would push back, somebody would die, and they killed I can't think of her name. Zatanna's father died there too.
Yep.
And this was big because these were major characters in the DC universe, and people later on said, we had no idea Alan Moore was killing these people off because they probably wouldn't have let him. If you really want to be chilled, go back and read Swamp Thing number 46, where Swamp Thing is part of the whole group that gets together and, they're being gathered to talk about the impending crisis, and Alan Moore's take on Luthor. It was your 3 good guy, but you're chilled because you're like, and then we hear Luthor, and I swear there's scenes Alan Moore wrote in this series that chill me to this day. And again, if you've never read it, the books are out. You should be able to find them. I'm surprised there's not an omnibus on these. Again, we're giving these companies billion-dollar ideas, and they're ignoring us. Well, they did bring Conan back to Marvel. So, anyways, Saga of the Swamp Thing / Swamp Thing, and I read the entire run Marvel. Alan Moore did, and it went to Rick Veitch afterwards, and his run was aborted. But that's a different story. We'll talk about some other time. Dan?
Yes?
You're the man. Tell us the plan. I'm gonna rant.
Was the end? It was the end of that at this point, but the end of the What If series that started in the 70s and ended in the 80s. I love the idea of the What If series. I like to pick those up because, especially when you kind of read them, it's what if. What was the one we actually said earlier? What if the Dark Phoenix had lived? Those are interesting stories, and sometimes they would then spark other ideas. It's like, okay, well, what if then that didn't happen in that What If story? And what was really cool in the 90s, they started doing some of those. They did what if this happened in the What If story? It was like, oh. What if the X-Men survived the Inferno, and then what if the X-Men who survived the Inferno became vampires? It was like, what? But the original series, of course, set all this up and set the idea of being able to look at other ways that the stories could have gone. But at the same time, it also then set up the Marvel's extended universe, multiverse, which they of course have. And for some odd reason, the real one is 616, which I don't understand. But anyway.
Oh, that was Alan Moore did that in a Captain Britain story as kind of a FU to Marvel.
Yeah.
Because he knows that the translation of the number of the beast being 666 is incorrect.
Yeah.
The real translation is 616. So when he was doing his Captain Britain story and Marvel was dicking him around, he was like, well, this Captain Britain is from Earth 616. So it was Alan Moore giving Marvel the finger.
I love it.
That Alan Moore. What a wacky guy.
Oh, I wish he could have played more in the Marvel Universe.
How about you, Adam? What's your number? 6. 6? 6.
Yes, my number 666 is it's the first comic book I remember owning that was just all mine. Transformers number 6 was my first book that started me collecting, but this was the first thing I ever remember being mine, and it was a little digest of Marvel's Return of the Jedi adaptation.
Oh.
It was probably the pocketbook.
Yeah. Yes. That my dad bought me from Newsland, which was like the newsstand place in my hometown that had comics, but we rarely went there because it was on the other side of town. Even though my town wasn't huge, it just, Hy-Vee was where I went because it was 3 blocks away from the house instead of like a mile. So, I remember that was pretty cool. That was kind of like my introduction to the comic books as a thing. A Jedi came out in 83, so I was 7. And I don't remember when I got the book, if it was 83 or 84, but I just remember I had it. I would look through it constantly, just constantly look through it. And it was kind of the seed that was planted that comic books were this thing that existed, and they did comic books of things that I loved. So I loved Star Wars. That was like my first big love as a kid was Star Wars, and here was a comic book of a movie that I had seen at the theater, but since home video wasn't quite a thing yet, I could read the story over and over again.
They had this other thing called novelization, just so you know.
Well, I was 7.
Where are the pictures?
I can't tell you how many movies I remember from reading the novelization, especially if it was by Alan Dean Foster.
Yes.
The Alien novelization?
Alien, Clash of the Titans, Meteor, and some of them I remember Fantastic Voyage by Isaac Asimov. And then when I watched the movie, it was like, well, this sucks. The book was so much better. And then I realized that, the book was an adaptation of the movie, but Asimov hated the science so much he fixed it all.
So that's my number 6, and it just is like a running theme throughout my 80s comic experience. Is just as I said at the top of the show, lots of stuff that was tied into things that I loved outside of comics, but all of that stuff led to comics. So I don't know. I will always be happy for all the things that I loved as a kid before May of 1985, because it all got me to the comics at the spinner rack.
There you go.
So that's my number 6. How about you, Cory?
Well, to wrap us all up, you know who doesn't talk about the 80s?
I have no idea.
These guys, our sponsors. That's right, here at the Solitaire Rose Radio Network, we have ads, and our first sponsor is me. That's right, your charming and delightful old Uncle Rat Bastard. I have my first book out with Dangerous Dan Mohr. It's the first 100 strips of our online web strip, Worldwide News, the story of the lowest rated cable news network. And you can get yourself a copy with commentary, with all sorts of extras, with signatures and everything. Just email Dan over at lordshadowflame@gmail.com. Our top sponsor, who's been with us since day one, is DreamHost. DreamHost.com. You need yourself a website, and DreamHost.com is the #1 web host in the whole known universe. Just head over to DreamHost.com, put in the code KRAYZ, KRAYZ, get $20 off your first year. How can you beat that? Our other sponsor is Graze, GRAZE.com. Healthy snacks for a healthy lifestyle. Just head over to Graze, put in the code CORYS3R5P. Your first and fifth box are free. You could get them weekly. You could get them bi-weekly. You could get them monthly. You could just order a whole bunch of them. It's great stuff to keep you away from the vending machine at work. Now, if you would like to leave a comment for any of the podcasts that we do, we'd love those. Go ahead and email us at solitairerosenetwork@gmail.com, or you can call 952-856-0519. Operators are standing by. Okay, it's just a place that will record your calls, but we'll play them on the air. We'll answer your questions. We love getting feedback. Tell us what you think. Ask a question. Suggest a topic. Be a guest. Send us your stuff. SolitaireRoseNetwork@gmail.com. If you would like to advertise on any of the Solitaire Rose radio shows, you can. Just email us at SolitaireRoseNetwork@gmail.com. Subject advertising. Thanks. Got to fit them in, you know.
Pretty tricky. Yeah. You owe us another one next week, so we're going to start with you at part 2.
No. I'm going to finish up. Number 6 is one that Joe mentioned already.
Oh?
Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Oh.
Now, by this time, I was in college. I was a huge comics nerd. And I had started reading DC years before when I saw Roy Thomas had switched from working at Marvel to working at DC. And then I realized, oh, that's where Gary Conway went too. And then Marv Wolfman and George Perez came over. And it was, oh, wow. Wolfman and Perez are working together on this. It's the Teen Titans. I hate these characters. So I didn't pick it up for 10, 12 issues till finally somebody said, no, it's really good. And it was, okay, it's George Perez, so it can't suck that hard. But they started building toward Crisis on Infinite Earths, and by this time I was already a subscriber to Comics Buyer's Guide and reading all this stuff. And DC really hyped this as, this is how we're going to clean up our continuity and go after Marvel. Because DC was a distant number 2 in the direct market. They weren't even close. And then New Teen Titans hit, and it was selling about as good as the X-Men in the direct market. None of their other books were, but that one was. And then I remember reading the first issue of Crisis and going, holy crap. And I don't think you're ever going to get that feeling again. I mean, we came close with Jonathan Hickman's Avengers. But you're never going to get that feeling of the rug has just been pulled out from under you. Because now they pull the rug out from under you every other month. But with Crisis, it's hard to put into words how big it felt. I mean, Supergirl died. Flash died. And we were told they are never coming back. And never, we still haven't got that version of Supergirl back. Barry Allen, it took 30 years for them to bring him back. The Justice Society, it took a long time for them to fix that. It really felt like this is a story that changes everything. And I think comic companies have been chasing that ever since with their events for that feeling of this changes everything, but no one had done anything like that before. You go back and read Secret Wars, and it's crap, but it's
Galactus is doing something.
Here's a bunch of heroes, and they're going to fight the villains. And then at the end of it, a couple things change, and who cares? Crisis, the multiverse is gone. All of these characters who'd been around for decades, gone, changed. Superman, restarted. Wonder Woman, restarted. Hawkman, made into a goddamn mess. Flash, restarted. It was huge. And if you look after Crisis, for a couple of years there, DC was the #1 comic book company, especially on the run-up to the Batman movie. It felt big, and I don't think that if you weren't there, you can't understand how big it felt. It really was kind of this once-in-a-lifetime thing, and I don't think Marv Wolfman ever really quite recovered from it, because I can't think of any stories he did after that that were great. He was good, he was workmanlike, but Crisis was that's the culmination of his career. And it showed George Perez is the #1 comic book artist for superheroes. No one could do anything like that again. Well, believe it or not, kids, you have listened to us blather on for almost 2 hours about funny books, and we're only half done. So we're getting together again next week to finish off the list.
Yes.
And as we say every week, the comic we like the least, we still like better than the comic that you like the most. Joe?
Well, you don't come to me right away. We got to go to our guests.
I throw it to you, and you throw it to the round robin thing.
Yeah, but I'm the last on this. Because you don't want to hit my music over them talking.
So go to Adam and then to me, then to Joe. Jeez.
Yeah, see? Oh, don't forget Wolfie.
Oh, yeah, okay.
So
Adam?
Listen to Panels and Pizza.
And eat pizza while you're doing it.
And read comics, but after you've washed your hands.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless it's early 90s Image, then it's okay.
Or 90s X-Men.
Yeah, they're pretty worthless.
Or
now.
Death Meat.
He's gonna puke! He's gonna puke! Dan?
Yes. Listen to Podcast and Pizza. Was that right, Adam? Is this?
Panels and Pizza. Close
Panels
enough.
and Pizza. Well,
It's a podcast.
Listen to Panels and Pizza. and read Everyday Gods and read Worldwide News and read other comics because but pay for mine. Anyway, yes, Wolfie.
All right. So, will Adam be able to do a whole podcast without pizza in front of him? Will Daniel realize the voices are really all him? Will Cory be able to get control of the show back? Now that Joe is older, will he be able to control his bodily functions long enough to record? Answers to none of these questions, but more talk about 80's comics in the next episode of Crazy Comics and Stories. Joe?
Hit my music.
We done, bitches!